Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to go in depth on how DDoSing works, IP grabbing, and what's happening currently in the RuneScape community. With false information being spread everywhere, there seems to be a lot of people commenting and making statements on things that just isn't true and is pure speculation on how DDoSing works and how to combat it. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. We'll start off with the differences between a denial of service attack and the more known term DDoSing. A denial of service attack typically uses one computer and one internet connection to flood a targeted system or resource, and a DDoS attack uses multiple computers and internet connections to flood a targeted source, which can also be called a botnet. Now let's take this one step further and simplify it a bit more. The majority of attacks being performed on RuneScape are DDoS attacks performed with cheap web-based stressors, otherwise called booters. These have been around for years and years, and for you older players, you may remember them being big on Xbox Live in games like Halo 2 or Call of Duty, where your internet would go out when you got into an argument with some 12-year-old who paid $3 to hit you offline for 5 minutes. These stressors, or booters, whichever you prefer to call them, are botnets that are selling access to them for people to use for a monthly or lifetime fee. They are generally pretty weak, but more than enough to take off a home connection. Now, because these booters are using a botnet to flood the target's internet, there is no way to tell where the attack is coming from, as you simply log into the booter client and enter the IP address and the port, which is normally port 80 for a home connection, and the amount of time you'd like to flood the target for. Also, for added protection, they would normally always log into the booter client with a secure VPN. Even if you did monitor your computer's internet traffic, you'd see hundreds if not thousands of connections connecting and disconnecting, and none of them would be of the person sending the attack. Now that we explained DDoSing, let's talk about a normal denial of service attack. This is much simpler to explain, as it's essentially putting your internet connection against the other person's. This is a very simple example, but that's really all there is to it. This is trackable, as the connection that is attempting to attack your internet is my own personal connection. The only protection I would be on is probably a VPN, though this method of performing a denial of service attack is primitive and normally your connection will never be overwhelmingly strong enough to take someone offline, and at the end result would most likely be both of you just lagging, if anything happening at all. This method's very outdated and isn't used very much. So with that being said, the people talking about just track their IP and report them, it's not that simple. The next thing I'd like to talk about is how your IP address is found. This gets a little bit trickier, as there's hundreds of ways for someone to get your IP address, and it only takes one slip up for it to get out there. That slip up doesn't even have to be your fault either. Before we get into that though, we have to address the types of IP addresses out there, static and dynamic. We'll start with the most troubling type of IP address, which is static. A static IP address does not change. It is very difficult to change a static IP address. Those of you that have Comcast may know of this issue, as Comcast 90% of the time will force someone to come out to your house and force you to actually change your modem. So when someone gets your IP address and you are static, you are kind of screwed, to put it bluntly. The other type of IP address is dynamic. A dynamic IP address is the more common type of IP address you can have. To change your dynamic IP address, most of the time all you need to do is unplug your modem for maybe 1 to 5 minutes, plug it back in, and you now have a new IP address. This type of IP is a godsend if your IP address ever gets out there and someone is trying to use it against you. Now back to the original topic on how your IP address is found. Oftentimes, it is due to you being careless. For example, joining a TeamSpeak server, not updating your Skype to avoid being Skype resolved, clicking on IP grabbers, or having a keylogger or another type of remote administration tool on your computer that is monitoring your system. But other times, there are just things that can happen that are beyond your control, such as a security breach on a website that you use that's trusted like Twitch, or a corrupt administrator on a Westbot conduit or RuneLoader, etc. There once was a large security breach on the streaming program XSplit, where account details were leaked all over the internet, and things like that are just out of your control. So all in all, to be as safe as possible in protecting your IP address, you should first see if you are dynamic or static, and then look for a reliable VPN you can use whenever you're online. Which brings me to my next subject. People seem to think that if someone has your IP address and then you get on a VPN, your original IP address doesn't matter anymore. This is 100% not true. Let's say, for example, this is Bob. I have Bob's IP address, and Bob wants to play RuneScape. Bob gets on his VPN from South Korea, or wherever he wants to go, and starts gaming away. The IP address Bob is using to be online is still the one I have. If I send a DDoS attack to Bob's original IP address, it will still disconnect his internet, and he will be disconnected from the VPN he's on. The last subject I want to talk about is how to prevent a DDoS attack. Besides hiding your IP address, there really isn't any way to do this. I'm not sure if any of you remember when Lizard Squad was DDoSing the RuneScape servers. There was really nothing they could do to stop it. As we learned above, DDoSing is flooding the servers with information to restrict any real information from getting through. You can invest in DDoS protection, but essentially all DDoS protection is adding more bandwidth to help take the force of the attack, and you don't invest in DDoS protection for a simple home network anyways. But basically, if the attack is strong enough, whatever it's hitting will go offline. I just noticed I rambled for quite a bit, but I hope this gives everyone a rough idea on how DDoSing works and why it's not this simple issue that can just be dealt with. The fact you can't really prove who's doing it and where it's coming from just adds insult to injury in this case, and the best thing we can do is educate more people on how to prevent it ahead of time. I read a quote once saying, "The reason DDoSing has been around so long and still the #1 used form of cyber attack is because it simply works," which is as true of a statement as ever. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on what I should make a video on next. I was thinking of maybe making one of doxing someone, which is finding all of their personal information and can be used to recover their account, etc. But let me know in the comments and subscribe if you enjoyed.